Ever wondered why, in many ways, it's so much easier to draw from a photo than from life? Well, the simple answer is that life is in 3 dimensions. We have height, we have width, and we have depth. 3 elements of form to juggle. But when we draw from a photo, our photo is only in 2 dimensions. There is height and there is width, but there is no depth. Depending on the angle, there may be the illusion of depth, but it's a 2-dimensional sheet of paper. We could cut this head out and it would be a 2-dimensional shape. It would only have height and width. There actually is no depth in the actual image itself. Now, when I draw onto paper, I'm having to convert a 3-dimensional form where we have height and width and depth into a 2-dimensional form because I only have height and width to play with on a sheet of paper. So the camera has done much of the challenge for me already in that it's taken a 3-dimensional form and it's converted it into a 2-dimensional shape. So now, instead of having to convert 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions in order to draw, I merely have to transfer 2 dimensions in my reference to 2 dimensions on my paper. And that's fundamentally why it feels much easier. But you might think, well, there's not really much difference, especially in a face, in a head, because I can still see that even though, yes, we could cut out this shape, and it does only have height and width, I can still see that there is depth. I can still see the curving around of the form here. But if we have drawn from life, then we're probably aware of the degree to which this 3-dimensional curvature actually tricks our brain, actually misleads us when we draw. That in some ways, because we see the surface curving away from us, this makes it very easy to see perhaps more of the curvature, or simply because we're following a surface around to end up creating this space too wide. But with a 2-dimensional photo, I'm not misled in nearly the same way. I can concentrate on a shape and seek to draw that shape. So the camera has done much of the challenge of drawing this scene for us. It's taken the 3-dimensional reality and already translated it into a 2-dimensional form. Let's face it, any way in which a photo makes it easier to draw is not really a problem. But there are 2 main problems with drawing from photos, and I often see evidence of them in drawings, and so often I think they're a problem because they go unrecognized. So let's look at them now. Now, it's not easy to show the effect of 3 dimensions in a scene, even on video, but by moving back and forth slightly with this small stretch of the Australian bush, we help create the illusion of depth, because as we move, the relative position of every object in relation to every other object changes, and that helps us to see the form better. It helps us, in a sense, to see around things better. It helps us to see the gaps, the distances between things better, even though it is still a tangle of foreground grasses, small shrubs, trees, taller trees in the background, and it's quite a long way from the foreground to the distance. But as we move, we do get a sense that there are horizontal layers that step back. There are depths of planes of vegetation of various types and heights. And while this would be very complex to draw, if we start with the front planes, the closest things, and we move back through those planes of depths, but if we stop our video and we look at the same scene as a still photo, now we don't have the benefit of the 3-dimensional impact of slight movement. This is now the photo, if we took a photo as our reference, that we would be drawing from. Now, how much more complicated, how much more tangled is this? I wouldn't like to draw this, and I have some experience drawing scenes such as this. But in fact, if you think this looks bad, compare this to what a hard copy printout of the same scene looks like. I think it's worse. When we look at this mess, the most obvious thing that we've lost is the sense of depth. We've lost the sense that some things are closest to us. Some of these trees and shrubs are closer. Some of them are further behind, and some of them are further behind. Everything looks very close together, much closer together, in fact, than it looked when we were doing the slow walk past of this same stretch of bush. Now, if we spend a lot of time, sometimes we can work out, well, this must sort of be closer than this because I can see that some of these thin branches are in front of it. So sometimes we can work this out, but these sorts of objects can actually interweave into each other. So this is our first problem, that wonderful depth that we had, which let us see the individual elements, even though there were many of them making up this scene, is now gone. And all those depths of plane that, if you like, sat back one behind the other, have now all been concertinaed together. The other problem we have with photos, and we see in this photo, is that it simply shows too much detail. It shows more detail than I could ever see in real life. Now, any of the detail that's here, if I was still back at this location, I could see. I could look at this. I could look at this. I could look at these leaves further back here. But I couldn't look at them all at once as I can here. As soon as I focused on looking at the detail in one section, in any section of this, I would see those things very clearly. But the rest of the leaves, or the bulk of the leaves, in 360 degrees around where I was looking, would become less distinct, because my brain would focus its vision and its processing power on whatever I was actually focusing my eyes on, because, well, that's the thing that I'm choosing to look at, which must be the important thing, which must need to be seen more accurately, more carefully, more closely, in more detail. The problem is that all this detail doesn't just become overwhelming, it actually becomes misleading, because we feel the need to draw it, that somehow this is part of the scene, and if I'm a good artist, I'm going to be able to draw it. And sadly, I can see even way too many individual leaves. So once I start trying to draw what I see in my reference, I'm going to be in trouble. It may work for part of it. Perhaps I could draw some of these leaves, but even they're pretty small. What do I do when I come back here or here? So I have these two big problems when I look at this photo. And that is, I've lost my depth of plane. All the elements stretching right back appear close together. And I see much more detail over the entire scene than would be the effect if in life I were looking at this. And in fact, that's the reason the depth of plane disappears, because when I look at something closer, the things that are further away don't feel as focused, aren't as sharp, but because the camera has captured all the detail, it's made everything feel a lot closer. It's removed the gaps that my brain creates looking at a particular focal point, letting the peripheries be more blurred. The closer the object I look at is to me, the more blurry objects further away become. It's actually part of the way we perceive reality. We have to put that reality back into our drawing. And if I can't understand it, it's going to be a great challenge to draw it with any sense of reality. This stretch of bush is very close to the first, but not quite as dense. But we still have the benefit of a slight walk past to fully capture the sense of three dimensions, that although some of these trees are closer than others, there really is quite a bit of space and gaps between them in various proportions to each other, and some things are much closer than other things. It's actually a wonderfully deep view. And here is a photo based on that video. But even though in the walk past, the space felt much more open, much more gap between things than in the previous example, again, when we see the photo, things seem very closed in, very condensed, very dense, much denser than in reality. This is a challenge when we draw from photos, that we have to understand these weaknesses and analyze our photos so that we can put back in, at least in our mind while we draw from them, the three-dimensionality that this medium has removed. We need to have a sense of which tree between these two is closer. We need to have a sense of how much closer is this from this, or whereabouts is this in the depth of plane. As I go to draw, these are the decisions that will affect the mark making I do, because it's through my marks that I'm going to create the visual effect of whatever object I'm drawing at that point. What I don't want to do is to draw all of this detail the way it's presented here, even if I could. That would end up looking less realistic and would put so much line work on the paper that it might be hard to really make out almost what anything is. I have in fact drawn this scene, and this is how it looked. It's still a tangle, but my original is a tangle, and so that's okay. That abundance of plant growth is part of the subject, and I wanted to capture that. But what I've had to do is, in my mind, work out what are the closest elements, this shrub here, this tree here. As we go back, these things sit closer than these things, that sit closer than this, that sits closer than these bushes that are similar in size and really quite close, but on the other side of this tree here. And therefore they're drawn with a lighter touch, with a slightly different technique, to create the sense of being further away. Some detail, some leaves even, are drawn individually, because that also helps them to come forward and to feel closer, particularly these leaves here. But as we move further back with our leaves, with our foliage, we have to make sure that we're drawing the overall effect of the foliage. We're not continuing to draw individual leaves, except where it's quite clear that we can see them. These are all the decisions that as artists we not only get to make, but we have to make. So while drawing from a photo may feel a lot easier than drawing from life, and in many ways that's because it is, there are certainly some challenges with photos, where the photos collect not just too much detail, but an unhelpful amount of detail for us to be able to capture a sense of reality in our drawing. And because of that detail, and because that detail goes back so far, so much further than we would see in life, it has the effect of collapsing all the distance that we would perceive in life. And if I'm not careful, I can draw that collapsed detail instead of trying to recreate those depths of plane, stepping backwards in our scene from the foreground to the very far distance by my choice of marks and the effect that I choose to try and create for that particular part of the scene. I think the bottom line is there is no easy way, no shortcut way to a good drawing. Whichever approach we take, there will be pros and cons. But being aware of the shortcomings of a photo can certainly help me make choices that will overcome them and give even a fairly gestural drawing such as this, I believe, a good sense of reality to it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. It's so important because we draw so much from photos. I'd be interested to know of your frustrations or joys in drawing from photos in the comments. But look, whatever you draw it from, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.